Today, I'm excited to talk about the art of product management in the age of AI. Before I do, let me talk a little bit about why I'm making this video now. So many of you might have seen a video I put out called The Art of Product Management, which was a Wharton lecture I gave a while back. This is actually the most popular video I've ever created on YouTube, with over 500,000 views on this video. Now, here's the crazy thing. This video is now 10 years old as of this week, which is nuts in many ways, given that it's still getting a ton of views. And so it just felt like the right time to give a fresh look on the art of product management. And of course, with the backdrop of everything that's going on with AI and what that means for product management. So to start this journey, I want to talk a little bit about my own journey with AI and my own transformation of bringing AI into my product role. So I'll take you back to 2024. When I started to pay attention to what was going on with AI in the ecosystem, you'll see in 2024, we had things like Google starting to get serious about AI by renaming Bard into Gemini. We then had Anthropic launch things like Claude 3. We then had the beginning of the first multimodal models like GPT-4 and things like reasoning models with the O1 preview. Finally, we had Anthropic launching things like Model Context Protocol, allowing us to integrate AI with all the other tools and services that we were using. Now, I'll tell you, at this time, I was largely just watching all these developments. And certainly I was using ChatGPT as a replacement for AI, but I hadn't really thought about how I was going to transform my role, certainly, with these developments. In 2025, that's when I dug in. I felt like the amazing tools out there were worth exploring, in particular for the role of product management. Here is just a showcase of some of the tools that I've really gotten excited about in product management in particular, and some of the ones that I teach in my course. But 2025 was the year of experimentation for me to go really deep on all the different use cases and tools that were available for product management in the AI space. I'll tell you now, in 2026, I am totally AI pilled and believe the future of product management is really all about AI. You know, it's kind of weird. I'm going to quote myself here, but let's go with it. I wanted to say that it feels like the golden age of product. I'm able to accomplish far more than ever, far faster than ever, and without the traditional bottlenecks of waiting on my cross-functional partners to get things done. And so this is why I'm so excited about the role of product management now with everything that we can bring to bear with AI. And so today what I want to really talk about is my vision for what I see the product management role evolving into now that we have all these rich capabilities of AI. And I love that AI is enabling us to return to the craft of product management. And let me explain what I mean by this. So in that 2016 video, a decade ago, I really described the role of a product manager as driving the vision, the strategy, the design and execution of their product. And I really think that was the fundamental craft of what product management was about and has always been about. But you know, something really interesting happened in the last decade. We started to really specialize the roles in and around product managers. And so to illustrate that, of course, we had the core product team, which were the engineers, the designers, the testers that we were working with, the pod or the triad that was the core of the product management function. But we also had a set of shared resources that started to develop, specialized resources around product marketing, around UX researchers, around sales support and legal. And these were all people that the product manager had to interface with to get their job done. Similarly, the product manager was really responsible for executive relationships. They were the ones talking to the VP of product, maybe the CEO in the organization, making sure that there was strong executive management happening for the product and services that they were supporting and getting the resources they need with leadership. And finally, they also had to negotiate with their product peers because, of course, they only owned a part of the product experience and they needed to make that seamless with the rest of overall product. Now, all of these roles evolved for a reason, but you know what's so fascinating about it? It changed the nature of the product role. The product role became very much about coordination. There was all these stakeholders that PMs needed to coordinate with on a regular basis. And this really created the coordination tax, or here what I'm calling the coordination trap that PMs find themselves in, spending so much of their day on coordination, whether it's meetings or status updates or executive management, and sort of having less time to focus on the craft of product management. And so this is sort of what's happened as we've specialized in the product management role. But what I'm so excited about is how AI can bring us back to those pillars of the craft of product management that I talked about a decade ago. And this is because AI has so many benefits for the product manager. First, it makes us faster. It can enable us to capture meeting notes so we don't have to worry about summarizing meeting notes and capturing action items. It can actually generate status reports for us so we don't have to waste our time on simple status reports. It can even summarize customer feedback. It can make us much faster at our role. But what I've really come to appreciate about AI is that it also makes us smarter, that it enables us to be much more thoughtful and strategic about product strategy. It even enables us to tackle strategic challenges in deeper ways and find patterns in customer feedback that we might miss on our own. And so that's really exciting about AI's capabilities. Finally, it really gives me superpowers. It allows me to actually act as if I had additional resources on my team, whether it was a product marketer or a user researcher or a data analyst, and I leverage AI to extend my capabilities beyond my traditional role. And so this is why I'm so excited about what AI is going to does mean today for product management. And so let me talk about how I think the role of product management is going to return to the craft. I think we as PMs can now spend less time on stakeholder management and instead spend that time crafting the right strategy by spending more of our thought cycles on that. We can also spend less time on basic project management and instead think about how do we build repeatable systems inside of our workflows using things like Claude Code to automate workflows. We can spend less time on meetings and the hygiene around those meetings and instead spend that time accelerating the customer feedback loops of talking to customers, incorporating that feedback, validating with them, and iterating on our products and getting them to market even faster. We can spend less time on status updates because we can use AI to automate that, instead using that time to deeply mine for customer insights as we're looking to understand what our customer problems are and how we can invent on their behalf. We can also spend less time formatted slides. It turns out AI is getting pretty good at this, and instead spend our time refining and applying taste in the products and services that we're building. We can even spend less time writing specs because we'd rather spend that time iterating on the experience by building and manipulating prototypes that are actually showing the functionality that we expect to deliver to our customers. And so this is why I'm so excited about AI and its actual evolution of the product management role. And so to make this real, what I want to do is go through each of these dimensions of vision, strategy, design, and execution, and talk about how AI is fundamentally reshaping each of these. Now, at the same time, I'll talk about where product taste still matters throughout this as we walk through it. So let's jump in and talk about vision. Now, I've always said a compelling vision articulates how the world will be a better place if your product succeeds. And it's so important for us as product managers to put together a vision instead of simply relying on a short-term roadmap. The reason this is so important is it gets our teams to dream big. It gets ourselves to be ambitious about what's even possible with our products and services. Now, of course, when I think about this idea of dreaming big and vision, the person that always comes to mind for me is Elon Musk. And this is still as true today as it was a decade ago when I mentioned this. And I love his vision for SpaceX. Because when we think about what SpaceX is doing on a day-to-day basis, it's helping get satellites out into space. It's now actually even bringing astronauts to the International Space Station. These are incredible things that SpaceX has done with its business. But when you hear Elon talk about what his vision for SpaceX is, he talks about the fact that it is important that humanity become an interplanetary species. Just think about how big and bold that vision is. And that's how we should all be dreaming about our products and services. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that AI is going to come up with that big, bold vision for you. That is your job as a product manager to really have that big, hairy, audacious goal that we're all going after and to dream that up for your product. But let me tell you where AI is useful. It's incredibly useful for visualizing your vision, bringing that vision into reality as a visualization. Now, my favorite example of this comes from the Duolingo team. So many of you may know Duolingo as an incredibly useful language learning app. Maybe you've opened up the app to learn a little bit of Spanish or French. But what you might not know is they also recently launched a chess learning app. Now, it's kind of strange. Why did Duolingo get into the game of chess? Well, what was so fascinating about this is this was the work of an enterprising PM and designer on the Duolingo team. They had a vision that Duolingo should get into chess. And they also had this belief that Duolingo was the right company to do it because it leveraged so many of the same mechanics that made Duolingo so popular. This PM and designer thought that the idea of puzzles that is so popular in the Duolingo app would work just as well for chess. Equally, they thought this idea of spaced repetition, which again works great for language learning, could also work for chess. So this PM and designer, what did they do? They actually built a vision prototype using AI. They used Cursor in particular as their AI prototyping tool and built an entire prototype showing the vision of what this Duolingo chess experience could look like. Now, when the executive team saw this, they could see how this vision prototype brought to life a very Duolingo-style experience. They also looked at the competitor apps and realized, look, this looks very different than what any of the other competitors are doing. And so they greenlit this project based on that vision prototype. I'll tell you, if they had just communicated this as a product strategy doc, I do not think it would have gotten the rave reviews and the greenlit project it did. That was made possible thanks to the AI prototyping they did to visualize their vision. Let's now move on to strategy. I've always said a compelling strategy defines how your product will win in the market it plays in. It's this idea that, hey, look, we want to build products to really differentiate ourselves from what's out there. Now, when we fail to have a good strategy, we often end up in a feature factory where we're building features, launching those features, but they're not moving the needle on our business objectives. And so that's why it's so critical as a product manager to define a strategy and to do so in a way that allows you to win in that market. Now, my favorite example of a well-executed product strategy comes from Figma. Now, what I love about the story of Figma is when they launched, there was incredible product design tools already in the market. The market was, in fact, saturated in many ways. There was Sketch, which was the top product design tool, and there was also Adobe Photoshop, and they owned the entirety of the market. It didn't look like we needed another product design tool at the time. But Dylan Field had a vision for what he wanted to do with Figma. In particular, he had a strategy where he was going to differentiate by focusing on design collaboration. And in fact, the entire product was focused on this, that they were going to build a product design tool that made it easy to collaborate, just like at the time we could collaborate in Google Docs, but now do so in design. Now, what's fascinating about this strategic thesis, it was non-consensus, and right. What do I mean by that? Non-consensus meaning that this was not on the radar of any of the competitors. This was not something that the Sketch team was focused on or the Adobe team was focused on. And so they didn't think design collaboration was all that important. And in fact, designers weren't even asking for it. It turned out they were also right. Once the market saw what you could do with design collaboration with the Figma product, the rest is history. Now, this points out how useful it is to have a differentiated strategy and to then focus your entire organization executing against the strategy. We can see in the market share what exactly happened. Figma ultimately went up and dominated the market of product design tools, completely crushing crushing Sketch and crushing even Adobe, and becoming the #1 product design tool in the market with a very focused, very differentiated strategy. Now, coming up with a strategy for our own products involves answering these 3 questions. Where to play? Where does our product play in the market? And to answer that, we have to think about the problem we're solving and the target audience who we're solving for. We then want to think about how to win. How is our product going to win relative to the competitors in the space? We can do this by having a very unique value proposition. We could do this by having a unique business model, and we can also do this by having a unique growth strategy. And so we want to think about that as we're formulating our how to win strategy. Finally, we want to think about how to endure. And this is the idea of formulating a competitive advantage for why our product will continue to win and not simply be cloned by the alternatives in the market. Now, answering these 6 questions, these 6 dimensions, is critical to putting together a product strategy. But that doesn't make a compelling product strategy. A compelling product strategy needs these additional dimensions. We already talked about the last one here, non-consensus and right. But great product strategies are also insight-driven. They're leveraging some secret, as Peter Thiel likes to call it, about why you know something about the ecosystem or the market or the product or the customer that others might not know. You also obviously need a distinctive and focused strategy so that you are doing something different than the competitors. And finally, that strategy needs to be market aware. What works in one market isn't necessarily going to work in every market. And so as I talk about the dimensions of product strategy and all these attributes of a product strategy, I hope I'm making it clear that this isn't something that you can just ask an LLM and hope to get a compelling strategy out the other end. I've tried it. Let me tell you, it does not work. And this is an area where you want to leverage your taste, your judgment. That being said, there are tons of ways we can use AI for the product strategy process to really help us formulate a compelling product strategy. The first way we do it is helping us to research our market. This is the idea that we can leverage AI to understand our customers, our competitors, and industry trends better than ever. I am blown away by the deep research capabilities in all these tools, whether it's Claude, Gemini, Copilot, ChatGPT, NotebookLM, Grok. They all now have this deep research capability that allows you to give it a very detailed prompt, and then it'll operate for 25 to 30 minutes and do a complete industry research for you that's up to date with all the latest competitors. Now, when I'm about to do a refresh on my product strategy, this is the first thing I do. I go in and do a bunch of research using these AI tools very effectively. The other thing that AI is incredibly good at is critiquing your product strategy. Now, it's not going to formulate a compelling strategy all on its own, but it's really good at reviewing a product strategy and finding the weaknesses in it. And so what I've done is actually develop a Claude Code skill called Critique Product Strategy. I've also built it into a custom GPT in ChatGPT or a project in Claude. So there's many ways I've set up to invoke this, but it then does an entire critique on my product strategy. And I basically built this by actually giving it all of the best practices from my course on product strategy. And now anytime you give it a product strategy document, it will give you a detailed critique like we're seeing here. For example, here we're seeing it critique a product strategy I put together for a product idea I had around financial planning. And it's then saying, hey, look, you mentioned a couple of different target audiences, but it's way too broad. And you haven't narrowed in on any particular audience, and you lack validation on a specific audience to say why you're going after it. So very compelling feedback as you think about improving this. Now, when I was at LinkedIn and had a team of product managers, I wish I had this, because I would have had them go through this before they met with me, before they met with the executive team, to really refine and polish their product strategy. All right, let's now talk about design, that third dimension of the role of product management. I've always said a compelling design delivers a useful, usable, and delightful experience for your customers. And it's so critical to do that, to really create the products that really delight our customers as opposed to something they just use. Now, when we think in particular about the product manager's responsibilities when it comes to design, because of course they're working with product designers, they have unique responsibilities here. The first is to deliver customer insights. The PM needs to do customer discovery, customer research to understand what the customer needs, to understand their problems, to understand their pain points. The second thing they need to do is deliver data insights. It's this idea that we want to do quantitative research on the metrics and data we have to, again, better understand our customers. We then typically translate those into product roadmaps and specs that we then go and deliver to our design and engineering counterparts to help us then refine the product design. Now, in the age of AI, a new deliverable for PMs has cropped up, which is AI prototypes, which is an exciting way for PMs themselves to get deeply involved in the design process. And I think that's really important. So I want to talk about these deliverables for design and where AI is having the biggest impact, in particular on customer insights, data insights, and prototypes. So the first thing I use AI for is to synthesize customer surveys. Now, we get a lot of qualitative feedback through these customer surveys that we're constantly running. But AI can now finally do the synthesis for us, so we don't have to sit there and read every single survey response. You can do this in all of the AI tools, things like Claude and ChatGPT. I love to do this in tools like Cowork and Claude Code, because then I can actually automate this entire workflow. Now, I think it's important to take a step back and really articulate what's so special about what AI is doing here and how different it is than what we've done for so long. Now, even just a few years ago, all we could do when it came to feedback synthesis was this idea of sentiment analysis, where we would take in that raw feedback and it would tell us, is this a positive comment on our product? Is this a neutral comment on our product? Or is this a negative comment on our product? Okay, kind of useful for overall signaling, but we still had to read all the feedback. We then got a little bit better with tag clouds. We could then use keyword analysis to understand what are the keywords that are really cropping up. But even then, you didn't know when you see a keyboard like dashboard, does that mean they love dashboards? Does that mean they want to see more dashboards? Are they having issues with their dashboards? You still had to go read all the feedback. And now with AI, where it can read the feedback, synthesize it into themes, it's incredible that it can do this work for us automatically. Now, if this is something you tried maybe a year ago or 6 months ago and it didn't look that great, let me tell you, the models have gotten so good at this, to the point where it is finding patterns in the data that I'm missing when I do my own read through of the actual feedback. And so I am very impressed with these capabilities. Now, with these capabilities, it obviously increases our efficiency. We can spend less time on the synthesis piece because we can leverage AI for that. It also enhances our precision. Like I said, AI never gets tired of reading verbatims like humans do, and so it can get very precise on the themes that we often can't. Because of this capability, I am significantly increasing the frequency of which I'm doing this analysis. I remember at LinkedIn when we used to do NPS analyses, we did them quarterly because of the amount of work it took to do this analysis. Now at NoChoy, I am running these continuously, where every week I'm getting brand new insights auto-generated by AI from our customer NPS surveys. Now, What's so great about this is we can actually build end-to-end automated workflows of synthesizing customer feedback. And so I just wanted to give you a sense of what this looks like. I have now built a scale in Claude Code called Conduct NPS Analysis. It then takes this raw CSV file. All it has is dates, email addresses, NPS score, and verbatim feedback, which answers the question, why did you give us that score? And then it goes to work. About 20 minutes later, you get back a detailed HTML report where you can slice and dice the score and how it's trending over months. You can even see each of the thematic themes from promoters and detractors. What's great is I even got it to generate a full presentation. So this is using Gamma, which is an AI presentation tool, and it creates these auto-generated beautiful slides that are really an executive level overview of our NPS, the score, the key themes that are coming out of it, both from promoters as well as detractors. And it's incredible that AI can now do this end-to-end analysis from a CSV file to a beautiful PowerPoint automatically in about 20 minutes, something that would take weeks when I was at LinkedIn to do this through our product marketing team. Now, we can do the same kind of synthesization, not just for customer surveys, but also for user interviews. And so this is great because we spend so much of our time trying to get that qualitative feedback in one-on-one customer interviews. And so we can leverage AI to basically listen to those interviews, whether they're videos, whether they're audio or transcripts. It can then transcribe them and then synthesize the insights in that interview, summarize that interview. What's great about it is you can ask a prompt like this: please summarize this interview, include the following in the summary. Why is the company interested in the tool? What pains do they currently experience? What other tools has the company tried? Things like this, and get a very detailed summary. Now, what's great about it is that you can then have it find patterns across customer interviews. So AI can then say, hey, what are the patterns you're seeing from this interview summary and that interview summary across all 10, 20, 30, 50 customer interviews that we've done? And like I said, it's finding patterns that even I missed as I listened through all the interviews myself. And so again, you can use all of these different great AI tools to do this. I personally am moving most of my work to tools like Claude Code because I can automate an end-to-end workflow with tools like this. Now that we've sort of automated the synthesis of customer surveys and automated the synthesis of user interviews, the big challenge with customer interviews is you still have to go and spend hours interviewing customers. Or do you? What's really exciting now is there's this new bleeding edge way of doing AI moderated interviews. And so what's interesting about this is how this works is that the AI actually interviews the humans. And this is fascinating because AI will then not only ask questions based on your interview script, but it will actually personalize those questions based on the responses. So let's say you asked about, they mentioned some particular competitor of yours. It will then probe and say, can you tell me a little bit more about this competitor that you mentioned? Or maybe they mention a particular pain point and it will drill in and say, can you tell me more about this pain that you're experiencing with our product? It's kind of incredible that in real time, AI moderated interviews can have that kind of really personalization, just like a human moderator would do. And so you can see here a bunch of tools out there that enable you to do this. And my favorite example of this actually comes from the Anthropic team, because they have done this at scale for AI moderated interviews of how people feel about AI tools. And so they conducted a full-scale study of 81,000 participants across 159 countries in 70 different languages. And what's amazing about this is they use this AI moderator to actually conduct those interviews, to then translate that to English so their team can understand it. And this is amazing because oftentimes we can't do this scale of interviewing or even this cross international because of those language barriers. And it's amazing that AI is now removing this. Now with AI moderated interviews, we can go end to end from actually sending out the moderated interview to our customers, getting those interviews to actually listen to, leveraging AI to synthesize them, and have an incredible world of feedback that we can then mine to deeply, deeply understand our customers better than before. Now, the critique I often hear when I start talking about using AI for customer discovery, for things like customer surveys and customer interviews, and even now AI moderated interviews, is now that we're spending less time actually doing the interview, are we just getting worse research because it's 100% automated? And I think it depends on how you use these new tools to do research well. And I'll show you how I'm using them where I actually think I'm getting even better insights. And so here's the difference. Before, when we thought about how we did research, we had these big phases of conducting research and producing results. In that conducting research phase, we were doing things like coding up surveys, conducting interviews, spending a lot of time on that. We'd then start actually producing results. We'd be doing our quantitative analysis, reading verbatims, watching those interviews, and then synthesizing those themes. And so our assumption is because we're spending all this time in the conducting of research and the production of results, we're gleaning those insights during that process. Maybe we'd spend a little bit of time afterwards once the report was done, but most of our research came from this process. But let me tell you how my approach has changed now that I'm using AI. I spend way less time conducting research because I can use AI for that. I spend less time producing results because, again, I can use AI for that. But I'm spending way more time than ever mining for insights. And this is the key way that this customer discovery now is even more impactful than it ever was. So let me kind of give you some examples of this. Maybe I hear something in the report that talks about a theme in my product No Choi around search relevance. Maybe I want to dig in. So I ask the AI, show me 10 more verbatims that mention this search relevance theme so I can really understand it and get to the bottom of it. Something that frankly was very hard to do in the previous way that we produce research. Now, maybe some of the people in these interviews are mentioning one of our competitors, Obsidian. So maybe I'll say, hey, did other people mention Obsidian? What did they say about Obsidian that they liked better than our product? And so again, I'm drilling deeper. I might then actually start watching some interviews. And so I might say something like, what was the timestamp in John's interview when he first mentioned his search pain point? And then I'll pull up that video and start digging in to that particular part because I really want to understand from the voice of customer his pain around that particular issue. Or maybe I'll say something like, help me find 3 video clips for the sub-theme you just mentioned, not a cluttered interface. And then AI would go hunt across the hours of videos that it has, find those video clips based on the transcript, and allow me to go deep. Now, I hope you see, because I'm doing this, I'm mining for insights. Actually, I'm getting way better research and way better insights than I did in the old world where I had to spend all my time just conducting and producing the results. I can now spend those cycles on really deepening my understanding of the customer. Now, not only is AI useful for the qualitative feedback, but it's incredibly useful for the quantitative feedback, for analyzing metrics. What I love about this is that I can ensure that no data curiosity of mine ever goes unanswered thanks to AI. And so now you can see here, for example, I can simply ask a question in natural language to AI. AI then goes and writes the SQL query, executes that against our database, and then produces a beautiful visualization. Now, this is possible because of a few key capabilities that ended up actually being available in AI. The first was this idea of a code interpreter, that AI is extremely good at writing code on our behalf and then running that code immediately so we can see the results. And so that enables us to do this kind of data analysis. They then augmented it with great support for data. Ability to import CSV files and ability to import Excel files so then it can run that code and manipulation on top of it. They then added data visualization capabilities, really just JavaScript libraries where it can actually visualize your data, allow you to interrogate it, and see in graphical format the trends in that data. Now, the final unlock was this idea of the Model Context Protocol, which really enabled us to directly access your actual data warehouse, your actual database. And so I have it connected directly to a read-only replica of my production database, which then enables it to run these queries on your behalf. What's amazing is there's now MCP servers for any data backend you can imagine. Things like data warehouses, things like Bigtable, alternative databases as well. And so AI is incredibly good at now answering your natural language questions, converting it to the appropriate code in SQL, running that analysis against your database, and ultimately visualizing and interpreting those results for you, which is a huge unlock as we think about how we can understand our customers even better. Now, one of the deliverables that has really emerged as a real unlock for PMs is this idea of prototyping and using AI to prototype new experiences. Now, when you think about the way we used to do this, what we used to do was a PM would work with their designer to have the designer put together a series of wireframes or high fidelity mockups. And then maybe they would work with engineering to put together an actual prototype. Let's be honest, that prototype was often shelved and not prioritized, and you would simply make your decisions on whether to prioritize a feature based on the mockups that you've built, and then it's put on the roadmap to engineering. With AI prototyping, we have a whole new world of capabilities available to us as PMs. From purely prompts, we can now create fully functional prototypes that actually work, that actually are full-fledged web applications that actually have full fidelity experiences, animations, click-throughs. They even can have a login. They can even connect to a database. They can even call LLMs. And you can do this all as a fully functional prototype. What's great is you can then put that prototype in front of your customers. You can even instrument that prototype with things like heat maps, with session replays, with metrics, with surveys. And so we can get so much customer feedback on our proposed design, on our proposed product experience, well before engineering ever gets involved. Now enabling you to iterate on that experience with your customers, with your designers, well before you even prioritize it on the roadmap, enabling you to be sure what you build is going to resonate with your customers. There's a variety of prototyping tools. I mentioned a few of them here: Lovable Bolt, V0, Replit, Magic Patterns, Build, that enable you to create this experience, and encourage you guys to check these out. Now, what's so amazing about this is how quickly prototyping has taken over. Jinsu Park is actually a designer at Notion, and he said recently that he attended a design critique, really a design review meeting, and he noticed that no one was actually showing their work in Figma. Everyone was showing vibe-coded prototypes, kind of speaking to how fast this trend of prototyping is really taking over product and product teams. Now, I want to talk a little bit more in detail about how to use prototypes, because I think there's three critical ways that make prototypes really interesting. The first is using prototypes on the team. This is between the product manager, the designer, the engineer. As that pod is trying to figure out the right project experience, a prototype is the best way to do this. And to really hammer home this point, I love this quote from Steve Jobs. He says, "There's a tremendous amount of craftsmanship in between a great idea and a great product. And as you evolve that great idea, it changes and it grows. It never comes out like it starts, because you learn a lot more as you get into the subtleties of it. And you also find out there are tremendous trade-offs that you have to make. There are just certain things you can't make electrons do. There are certain things you can't make plastic do, or glass do, or factories do, or robots do. Designing a product is keeping 5,000 things in your brain and fitting them all together in new and different ways to get what you want." And so Steve Jobs is speaking to what we all do as product people, which is make trade-offs as we get into the realities of building product. What I love about prototyping is it gets us there faster. Instead of spending time and days writing documentation like a spec, we can instead spend our cycles more valuably iterating on that product experience, feeling the product in the medium that it's ultimately going to exist in, which is bits. And now we can start making those trade-offs. We can realize the things we can't make atoms do or bits do, and we can start realizing what that right product experience means. And so that's where I think prototypes are so valuable for the product team. Now, they're equally valuable for executive stakeholders. We already kind of talked about this example of how Duolingo used it to get executives to really greenlight this project and to turn it into something that they were actually going to move forward with. But it's something I'm seeing happening more and more, that someone has a great idea for a product experience, and instead of just creating a mock-up or a product strategy document, they create a full fidelity prototype, bring that to their executive leadership team, and find it's far more compelling of a way to get it greenlit, to get into really interesting nuances on the trade-offs of that product experience as people can actually play with that experience. Now, of course, a really big part of building prototypes is to put these prototypes in front of customers. I already talked about how you can create fully functional prototypes, hand them to your customers, and then take advantage of the fact that we can instrument it with metrics. We can embed surveys. We can do session replays. We can even do heat maps. And so all of this allows us to learn so much about what the right experience is for a customer well before the customer ever actually engineering ever has to get involved. Now, my favorite story to bring this to life is from the Sony Walkman. Now, I am dating myself here. How many of you even know what a Walkman is anymore? Let me elucidate you. This used to be a thing well before the iPod existed that allowed you to listen to music on the go. You take a cassette, pop it in there, and it would allow you to actually listen to music on the go. Now, at the time, Sony built a black Walkman. That was their standard Walkman. And the team was debating, should they build a yellow Walkman? So they conducted a focus group. In that focus group, they bring in a dozen people and they ask them, what do you think about this yellow Walkman? Now, people went around and they said, oh, it's pretty sporty. Oh, it looks sexy. Oh, it's a lot less boring than the black one. And so they had all of these, interesting positive feedback on the yellow Walkman. Now, here's the clever thing the team decided to do. On the way out, they said, hey, look, thank you for your time. As a gift of our appreciation, we wanted to give you a Walkman. And they had two piles on that table, a pile of black Walkmans and a pile of yellow Walkmans. Here's what's so fascinating. No one walked out with a yellow Walkman. Now, think about that. What do you think they learned more from? The fact that customers were saying, oh, the yellow one is sporty. It is less boring than the black one. Or the fact that everyone, when they had a choice, they walked out with the black Walkman. I'm pretty sure they learned more from their actions than their words. And so I illustrate this as a reminder that we can't just trust the feedback we hear from our customers when we show them a mock-up and say, what do you think? But we can trust when we get their observed behavior. When we put a functional prototype in front of them, we see where they click. We see if they come back tomorrow to that functional prototype. And so this idea of actual behavior being so much more important than express preferences is really why prototyping is so crucial when it comes to customer validation. Now, what's so fascinating about prototypes is not only has it been a great way for companies to really understand what their customers need, but the most forward-looking enterprises are actually completely changing their entire prioritization process based on this new capability. So I want to talk about what Anthropic does for the Claude Code team. Now what they are doing is they're starting their product development process with prototypes. The engineering and product team goes out there and builds a bunch of prototypes. They then launch those prototypes internally to their own internal customers. Those prototypes start getting used and they see which prototypes actually get used and what the feedback is. Now, when a prototype is heavily used internally and gets positive qualitative feedback from internal stakeholders, then they decide to prioritize it on the roadmap. And only then do they get to work commercializing that, productionizing it, making it available for external customers. Now, for the other features where engagement wasn't that high or they got negative feedback, they go back to the drawing board. Maybe iterate on that prototype or maybe just throw out the prototype entirely. But this is what's amazing. They have completely flipped the head on their prioritization process, where now they use the prototypes to decide what to build and what to move onto the roadmap, which is a really forward-looking way of how I think product teams are going to evolve with this new AI prototyping capability. Now, the last dimension I want to talk about when it comes to the role of the product manager is execution. And execution really encompasses all the work required to bring a product to market. Now, the reality is product managers, frankly, spend most of their time on execution. This is everything from the project management to file the tickets, the daily stand-ups that you're running, to the meetings that you're running, the status updates that you're sending, and the communication that you're doing to keep all executive stakeholders on the same page. All the work we need to do to take that product that we have conceived and bring it to market. And so it eats up a huge amount of time. This is an area where I've found AI is incredibly valuable for speeding up our time, saving ourselves time. In particular, I find the value when it comes to execution tasks are all related to AI-powered communication. Now, the reason I highlight these in particular is because as PMs, we spend a ton of time communicating with our team, with our stakeholders, with our peer PMs, with customers. And so that takes a lot of our time. And I'm finding is that AI is incredibly good at compressing the time needed for each of these tasks, whether it's meetings, status updates, creating presentations, or even executive communication. And so I want to highlight how I'm using each of these to save myself time and then ultimately enable us as PMs to spend that time on the higher level strategic work that we just talked about, whether it was strategy or customer discovery or analytics or whatnot. So let's talk about each of these. When it comes to meetings, I love using a tool like Granola to really summarize meetings for me. And of course, you can do this in a bunch of the other tools now, Zoom and a bunch of the other meeting tools as well. But what it does is it listens into my meetings. It then transcribes the entire meeting, and then it summarizes that into a very succinct summary of the key points made. It even then comes up with the action items as a separate section after the meeting. I no longer have to spend time summarizing my meeting notes, sending out action items, because Granola does that all for me. Now, what's also great is it goes a step further and in fact actually generates agendas for me. So I can tell it, hey, look, we're having the next week's meeting of the same series. Can you look at the past meetings and generate an agenda for this week? And it will look through the history of meetings, find the open action items to follow up, find the structure that you've typically used, and generate an appropriate agenda, saving me time around the meeting hygiene that used to be a tax I used to spend on top of meetings. Let's now talk about status updates. This used to be a chore that I had to do every week, where every week I would have to go through and really summarize what the team has worked on, what we're blocked on, what our core deliverables were, and things like that. I have now built an end-to-end workflow that does this for me. Now, the way I did this is I used Relay.app to create an AI automation. Relay is just an AI automation tool that basically allows me to create an end-to-end workflow that goes off every Sunday. The way this works is it links to my Linear, which is our project management system at NoteJoy, and it then looks at all the tickets that have been completed that week. It then summarizes them as a list of accomplishments. It also looks at any tickets that are actually flagged as blocked and summarizes that as blockers. Now, I then go in and have it look at all the documents that I worked on in Google Drive. Because those are the deliverables I'm working on. Maybe it's a spec, maybe it's a report, and then summarize the ones that I've actually worked on this week. I also have it go look at all the emails I've sent out to the team. That tends to be decisions that I've made on the team, and it summarizes those decisions as well. Finally, I ask it to look at my calendar and to basically put in here all the big team meetings that we had. Maybe we had some decision meetings or some important status update meetings. I get this delivered to my inbox every Sunday, and I can spend, 5-10 minutes cleaning this up, removing a couple things, and then fire this off. This task that used to take me hours is now down to minutes, thanks to AI automating an end-to-end workflow of pulling data from all the appropriate resources to make drafting a status update a breeze. Now, I'm also using AI to generate beautiful slides. And so this is really fascinating because I can actually create slides from scratch. And so to prove this very slide you're looking at was 100% built by AI. In fact, I used Gemini and Google Slides to do this. It came up with the card layout. It came up with the actual images that you're seeing. And you can see it did a pretty good job with a simple prompt that I gave it. And so we now have the ability to create AI-powered slides in all the popular slide ecosystems, whether it's Google Slides and Gemini, like I just talked about, or in Microsoft PowerPoint. Not only does Microsoft and Google have their own capabilities, but Anthropic now allows you to actually bring Claude into both the Google Slide ecosystem as well as the Microsoft Slide ecosystem, giving you a variety of options for how you want to generate those slides. Now, there's also a whole set of AI-native standalone slide apps that have emerged in the ecosystem. My favorite here is Gamma. As I showed you, I now rely on Gamma to create end-to-end beautiful NPS presentations for me fully from scratch without zero human involvement. So it's a great way to really think about removing that tax that we used to spend beautifying slides and leveraging AI to do that work for us. Now, the final piece of execution I love using AI for is writing executive communication. Now, we as product managers are responsible for communicating what our team is doing to the larger executive team. Oftentimes, we need to communicate big decisions that the team is making with the broader team. And I don't know about you, but I've spent countless hours wordsmithing in executive communication just to make sure it hits the right language I need, make sure it answers all the potential questions that will come up. And so I was thinking about how when I was at LinkedIn, I had a big important decision to communicate. I was working on LinkedIn Sales Navigator, and we were trying to decide whether this product was going to be a standalone product that had its own interface, or whether it was going to be a set of plugins that showed up on the LinkedIn.com interface. Now, of course, we made the decision to go standalone, and the product has done incredibly well with that decision. But at the time, it was a highly controversial decision. Should it be standalone, or should it be deeply integrated to LinkedIn.com? We spent a month on this very decision. Now, I then spent an entire week wordsmithing that email. Today, if I had to write that email, I would have leveraged AI in this way. What I would have done is taken the meeting where we decided which direction to go in and taken the full transcript of that meeting and have that ready for me. Then what I would have taken is my writing inspirations. And so you're seeing here 4 of my writing inspirations: Gokul, Jeff, Paul, and Emily. These are my favorite business writers for different reasons. I've read every one of Jeff Bezos' shareholder letters in the 20 years that he was writing them. I love Paul Graham's writing on startups and these days on education. I love Emily, but she talks so much about parenting and the data behind it, as opposed to the intuition we so much rely on. And Gokul has incredible frameworks for communicating decisions. And so these are all my inspirations. And so what I do is I have AI actually generate a style guide by pointing it to each of their writings. So you can see here, for example, I pointed it to Jeff Bezos' shareholder letters and asked it to prepare a style guide. I then said, based on that style guide and based on the decision meeting transcript I just gave you, please craft a memo for our executive team. And so then I got this beautiful memo that was written. And it is just so much better written than something I could have put together myself. Let me just read a couple of key phrases here. We've made a bold long-term bet. We will deliver a fully standalone LinkedIn interface. This choice reflects day one thinking, starting fresh so we can obsess over the needs of a sales professional rather than retrofit a consumer site. Then goes on to say, we're going to build the ideal seller experience. unconstrained. A blank canvas lets us surface the exact data, nudges, and workflows sellers need to win business. Man, this just punches up the writing that I would have done on my own to the next level. And I love doing this to save myself countless time when I'm actually putting together executive communication. Now, I hope I've shown you how the role of product management has evolved significantly thanks to AI across these 4 dimensions of vision, strategy, design, and execution. And how, in fact, we can go back to the craft of product management because we can rely on AI to do a lot of that coordination tasks and instead spend our time on really the core of what product management was supposed to be all about. Now, the last thought I want to leave with you with is this idea that in this age of AI, taste, in fact, matters more than ever. And despite our ability to leverage AI to automate a bunch of our work, we as humans, we as the product manager, need to apply our taste. And I hope I've shown you a variety of ways in where I apply my taste. First, with executive communication, I showed you applying my taste in terms of the writers that are my inspiration. Or in terms of product strategy, trying to come up with your own strategy that's insight-driven, that's non-consensus and right. That again is an expression of my taste, my conviction, my judgment that AI can't do for me. Or coming up with that big, hairy, audacious goal that I want to be our vision. Not something that AI is going to be able to do, but continues to require taste. And even in this age of AI, where automation is incredibly powerful, taste has never been more important in the product management role. Now, I hope you've learned a lot today on product management and where it's going in this age of AI. If you want to go deeper, I encourage you to check out my course, my AI productivity course for product managers, which really helps you to learn how to use AI tactically in all the scenarios I described, whether it's using it to critique your product strategy or to do customer discovery or to create your own analytics engine, or ultimately to even do things like executive communication. And so I encourage you to check that out and join folks who've already taken this course from a variety of folks. We'll have a link in the show notes to check that out. With that, I bid you farewell, and I hope you enjoyed today's discussion on product management in the age of AI.